I would like to start off by introducing you to Walter. Walter is a local businessman and a father of two in the small rural town of Biloxi, Mississippi. Walter woke up one day, like any other day, and went to work. He kissed his wife and kids, who were on their way to school, and headed into town to open up his small hardware store. As Walter drove to work, he looked up and saw that a storm was coming. Little did he know that the dark clouds hovering above would change his life forever. Walter got a call later that day from his wife, and she told him that a large storm was coming and his kids were released early from school. He had been through storms and hurricanes before, but what he didn't realize at the time was that this was not just another storm. As he drove home that day, he was greeted with hail the size of baseballs that smashed against his windshield, causing it to crack and then shatter. He was worried at this point, but he did not know that what was about to occur would change his life as he knew it. As he pulled into his driveway, he opened his door and found that he stepped out. And when he stepped out, he was up to his ankles in water. The hail had stopped, yet howling winds nearly 150 miles per hour were stopping him from moving, let alone entering his house. He finally entered his home to find his wife and kids crying. They had never seen something like this, and Walter began to worry. He turned on the television only to find that the cable was out. Then he heard it, a sound that would change his life forever. In an instant, a tree that Walter had grown up with was now laying flat in his living room. As water rushed in and deafening thunder boomed, Walter knew that this was no ordinary storm. His first instinct was to get his family into the car and head for a safer place. When he looked outside to find his car, all he found was a large tree lying across the front of it. He began to panic. There was no way to escape. An hour had passed as Walter thought of what to do. The phones were dead, there was no running water, and all electrical equipment was down. He rushed upstairs and told his family to stay in the bathroom. There were no windows, and this was the safest place during a storm like this. That is, until the water began to rise. He and his family had been in the bathroom for nearly 4 hours until Walter heard silence. He wasn't sure whether the storm had stopped, but silence was a good sign. As he opened the door, he found that water began to rush in. He looked down the stairs to find that there were not any there, and that they were submerged in murky, deep water. His heart was racing. He knew he had to think quickly. He raced to a nearby second-level window, only to find that the water level had risen up to that point. Thinking quickly, Walter saw a neighbor's boat floating by and rushed his family outside and into it. It was no longer safe in the house, and he figured the best way to escape was by boat. What he didn't know was that the calm he had heard was the eye of the storm, and the worst was yet to come. As his family shuffled into the boat, and wind began to howl, the rain that was just absent 30 minutes prior began coming back in full force, stinging as it hit his face. His mind went blank. "Am I going to die tonight?" he said. Thinking quickly and letting all emotions slip away, he tied the boat to a nearby power line. At this point, the water had risen to 20 feet, almost fully covering his house. As the rain and wind picked up, he told his family to lie down and stay still. That night, he and his family endured one of the most horrific natural disasters in human history, tied to a power line above his house. It was impossible for him to sleep, so Walter rode out the storm for over 10 hours in a rickety boat. The next morning, once the sun broke through the clouds, Walter assessed the damage. What used to be a thriving neighborhood in the heart of Mississippi now looked like ground zero of an atomic bomb. As Walter untied his boat and paddled for help, he saw lifeless bodies of neighbors, children, and friends float by. He had survived, but without proper food and water, the clock was ticking. This is just one of the tragic stories of the devastation of Hurricane Katrina. Walter, like many others, suffered through this horrific disaster. Now imagine yourselves in that position. Imagine waking up to a neighborhood you live in, now gone completely. Imagine paddling a boat by bodies of people you know and see every day. This is the devastation that most people cannot dream of, yet for thousands of people in 2004, this was reality. Another harsh reality of natural disasters is that there is a lack of funds and people to help clean up and restore the lives of victims after a storm. Unlike New Orleans, which didn't get the worst of the hurricane, the people of Biloxi were left to fend for themselves. There was no FEMA or Federal Emergency Management Agency, and there were no shelters set up to support the victims. Church organizations and volunteer programs did much of the helping and rebuilding. One of these organizations was HODR, or Hands-On Disaster Response. What Hands-On is it is a volunteer organization that sends relief to wherever needed. When Hurricane Katrina devastated the Gulf Coast in 2004, many of the volunteers that were seen in the news were a part of this amazing group. I had the privilege of being a member, and I can honestly say that it was one of the best experiences of my life. Now more than ever, there is a need for volunteers to help with national and world disasters. With every year, there is a constant increase in natural disasters. According to the United Nations Environmental Program, or UNEP, since the year 2000, natural disasters occur at a rate from 300 to 400 a year. This is a staggering number, and with each coming disaster, more and more volunteers are needed. Hands-On Disaster Response helps with this by providing diligent, free workers in the time of need. All volunteer-based, Hands-On has helped thousands of Americans, as well as families worldwide, survive during the tough times after a natural disaster. This organization exists because it can be costly for the government to fund cleanups. Hands-On makes everyone's job easier by providing the same caliber work at no cost at all. But realize that with each disaster, less and less volunteers are concentrated within one area. This is where each of you can be of service. Right now, many of you are thinking, well, on paper, it seems like a great cause and a great use of extra time, but I'm not cut out to do this type of manual labor. To this I say that is untrue. Whether you are old or small, old or young, big or small, strong or weak, Hands-On is the organization for you. I ask my audience to simply give it a chance. People think that helping after a natural disaster is grueling work that only certain men can do. This is an incorrect assumption. The point of Hands-On is to simply give back to those in need. They accept whoever wants to help, regardless of age or sex. There are no physical qualifications or requirements. I once worked on a 2,000 square foot basement, and there were people from the ages of 10 to 65 helping. It is not the amount of work that you do, but rather your time, your work ethic, and the time of need. More than ever now, we need to realize that there are many around us that are less fortunate. Whether you write a check for $100 or decide to be a worker at Ground Zero, every effort helps. The point of Hands-On is to show others what natural disasters can do and to further open people's eyes to the tragedies that surround our everyday lives. In order to get a better feel of what it's like to be involved with and work for Hands-On, I would like to share a story with you of one of my many experiences with Hands-On. In 2004, when I was a sophomore in high school, I traveled to Biloxi, Mississippi to help out with the disaster after Hurricane Katrina. For 5 days, I woke up at 5:30 a.m. and went out to different work sites and gutted and cleaned houses in the Biloxi area. At one of the houses I gutted, I met the two owners before starting work that day. I met a man with his wife who told me the story of how he had survived the hurricane. For 3 days, they sat and lived on their roof, waiting for a sign of help from the government or anyone willing to help. After that, the man said that he had recently had a bout with cancer, and during the hurricane, he was going through chemotherapy. At the time, he was taking drugs to help the side effects of chemo, but once the hurricane hit, he lost all of his medication. For 3 days, that man suffered with his wife with no medication, thus making him extremely sick. But he never gave up. When my group showed up to gut his house, he began to cry. The reason he had called for Hands-On service is because without getting a return from his insurance company on his house, he was not able to pay the bills for his medical expenses and his medication. Once inside the house, he told us that when he had returned, he had found his house looted and destroyed. In the previous months, crack cocaine addicts had used this house as a den and had stolen many of the items from his house. Before me was a man who battled cancer and illnesses all through this hurricane, and then returned home to find his house completely looted and destroyed. This is just one story of the pain and anguish that a person had gone through in order to survive.